Hello, Pastor Andrew here with another installment of our series of the attributes of God, talking about the will of God this week, and we've talked about Ephesians chapter 1 verse 11 that says that all things happen according to the counsel of God's will, and we've looked how that has implications in our day-to-day lives, how it has implications in suffering. But I had a question posed to me regarding the how this jives with the fact that there is evil in the world. And that's a very complicated question. But I thought it was good to go ahead and pause at this point in this series and try to address this issue. It is admittedly a very both high, highbrow issue, high-minded issue, and so we're delving into some of the deeper ends of theology with this. Uh, don't know if that interests you or not, but at the same time, it's also not just intellectual; it's also highly emotional. And so I don't want to short shrift any of that. I don't want people to feel like I'm just trying to throw these kind of statements over what is definitely a complicated subject. But I do want us to try to draw from this what is the Bible's attempt to give us a picture of what God is like and how these things work together. So I want to begin by uh, looking at one verse, Deuteronomy 29:29, which is sort of a foundation starting point with this. And that is this: the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may do all the words of his law. So Moses, the writer of Deuteronomy, is saying that there is a secret will in God and a revealed will in God, and that revealed will is his moral will, those things he commands us to do, those things he says that are right and wrong. But there is a secret will which we do not have access to, and that is what God is actually up to in the world. And so, on the one hand, he may have his will might be that there be no evil. That's his revealed will. That's his moral will. But at the same time, he might ordain, and that's a tricky word, that evil exist in order to accomplish his ends, his perfect ends. Now, in doing so, God is not himself becoming guilty of sin. God does not engage in evil acts. God does not cause these acts to occur. To say that he ordains that they be and causes that they exist are two different things. We know that God is not associated with evil and with sin at all. One passage that gives this clarity to us is James chapter 1, verses 13 through 14, where James writes, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire." So when we sin, we cannot say this was God's will, because it was not. God did not engage in your sinful action. You did so by your own volition, by your own will. You are 100% responsible for your actions. Yet, at the same time, we can see that God ordains that such actions exist for his own purposes. Two examples of this are Genesis 50, verse 20, and Acts 2:23, which are talking about great evils that existed. In Genesis 50, there at the end of the Joseph story, Joseph has been sold into slavery by his brothers. His brothers have convinced their dad that he was killed by a wild animal, and meanwhile Joseph goes to Egypt for 14 years where he is imprisoned and is falsely accused of various crimes and is in terrible condition for a long period of that time. But at the end of it, Joseph is, through a series of events, able to rise to prominence in Egypt. He's able to become essentially the vice president of Egypt, and through his policies is able to create famine relief programs that saves the life of many, many people, including his brothers and his father, who come down for help from Canaan. That's the short version of the story. At the end of the story, his brothers are afraid that he is going to kill them. And Joseph responds to them and says, "You meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Now, does that dismiss the responsibility in Joseph's brothers? No, it does not. But it does mean that in their evil actions, God actually was up to something else. And in his mysterious sovereignty, he is able to so move through the evil actions of human beings that his ends are in fact advanced by our wickedness. I have compared this before to something like a pen. I did not create this pen. Had nothing to do with the creation of this pen. The plastic, the drawing out of the various materials that are necessary for this pen, but that has no bearing upon the fact that though I did not create it, I can use it for whatever purposes I see fit to use it for. In the same way, God did not create evil, but he is nonetheless able to use it for his purposes, and his purposes to in fact be advanced by it. Some have said that in life we need a Genesis 50-20, we need a 50-20 vision for our lives. A 20-20 vision in physical life is perfect vision. We need a 50-20 vision because the evil that we encounter, that we face, that come against us at times, we need to see through that God is up to something we can't quite understand. Coronavirus is an example of this. God did not create coronavirus. It's not a part of his good will, but it's certainly a part of his secret will, his will of decree that this exists for his purposes, which are mysterious to us but clear to him, and they are good and perfect. Moving forward, Acts 2:23 is another example of this. Peter is here preaching at Pentecost, and he says these words. He says, "This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men." So I'm going to ask the question, who killed Jesus? God or humanity? Who's responsible for his death? The answer is, in some sense, both. Simultaneously, at the act of in the cross, and we could say that this is the climactic event for this tension in the Bible, this tension between God's will and his secret will and his revealed will, and so on. In one event, the greatest evil ever committed in all of human history is at the same time present with the greatest act of God's redemption. And both of these things are true at the same time. It does not resolve the human beings from being responsible for their evil in the actions of crucifying Jesus. But in their evil actions, God's plans of redemption were advanced. In our own minds, we cannot reconcile these things together. The Bible, in fact, consistently holds them in tension and never attempts to bring reconciliation to them. It simply claims that both are true. And we, by faith, then say, while it may seem like a contradiction in our minds, in the perfect mind of God, which is so total and so complete and so full of knowledge, these things are held in perfect balance. There is no contradiction whatsoever. I think a couple of visuals here are helpful. Now, these do not give philosophical sort of rigor to this, but they do maybe give us some conceptualizations that help us piece them together. One person has said it's like standing at the on a railroad track with the two rails running beside you. At your feet, they seem to be a distance apart, but off on the horizon, they merge together into one. Such is the case with this issue, the will of God and how sovereignty fits into this situation, the free choices of human beings, and yet the will and decree and plan of God, not being in contradiction to one another, but being held together in perfect balance. My favorite illustration comes from Charles Spurgeon, who says that these two things, God's decrees and our free choices, that these two things are like a rope going through a hole in the ceiling. And on the top end of that hole is a pulley. And so it's one singular rope going over top of a pulley and coming down with two strands on either side. If you pull only on one side, then you will not be able to climb. The rope will unravel off of the pulley. So if you only want to hold on to the free will of humanity, you will not be able to make true theological progress in your understanding of what is revealed about God. And the same thing is true about only holding on to God's sovereignty. If that's the only thing you want to say, everything is chalked up to his sovereignty and there's no responsibility in man or whatever, you're going to do the same thing. And the result of that is regularly people descending into some form of false teaching or even a heresy of sorts. And these things can cause great catastrophe in people's spiritual lives. What is really the task to do is to hold these two things together, both of the ropes together. This is what the scriptures do. They don't try to reconcile them. They don't assume that they're in contradiction. They hold them together. And if we do this, if we hold sovereignty of God and the free choices of man together, then we can climb the rope. It will not unravel off the pulley. We can then make theological progress. We can look at the world in balance and understand that I am responsible for my actions. I am responsible to preach the gospel, to pray, to speak out against injustices, to do my part. And when I sin, I'm responsible for that as well. And at the same time, God is up to a mysterious plan that is only revealed to him, not to me. And I, on my part, by faith, trust in him for that. Admittedly, this is a very complicated and difficult subject. But I think it's important that we give some thought towards it. What do you think about this? How has this maybe helped you in your understanding of God's will and our responsibility? How has it challenged your thoughts? Maybe how has it challenged the way you've thought about this in the past? Maybe given you more clarity than what you previously had. At the end of it, I hope that this helps your faith grow more robust and stronger. And I pray that it does just that and gives you more ground on which you can stand stably as you seek to honor God with your life. God bless. Have a good night.